Sophia, a determined law student at Boston University, finds herself unexpectedly drawn to Greg, the humble janitor. Despite the judgment of her wealthy classmates and a world that believes in appearances, a simple act of kindness sparks an undeniable connection between them. As their relationship deepens, Sophia must confront societal expectations, personal doubts, and the harsh whispers that threaten to tear them apart. Can their love survive the pressure, or will it crumble under the weight of other people's opinions? Stay with us to find out how it all unfolds, and don't forget to subscribe. Sophia stood outside the bustling cafeteria at Boston University, a faint breeze rustling her hair as she absently scrolled through her phone. It had been a long morning filled with back-to-back lectures, and now, the only thing on her mind was food. Her stomach growled in protest, reminding her it had been hours since her last meal. She rubbed her abdomen lightly, a little embarrassed at how loudly the protest echoed. She needed something, anything, to settle the hunger gnawing at her. Her friend Lena was late, as usual. They had agreed to meet for lunch, but Lena had this tendency to drag out every conversation with her classmates. Always the center of attention, always the one people turned to. Sophia had always admired that about her, how effortlessly Lena made friends, how everyone seemed to be drawn to her like bees to honey. Just as she was about to check the time again, Lena appeared, walking out of the building with a group of students from their political science class. Lena was holding court, laughing at something someone had said, her rich, melodic voice cutting through the crowd. She caught sight of Sophia and waved enthusiastically, striding over to her with a confidence only someone from a well-off, connected family could carry. Sophia smiled and waved back, half relieved to see her friend and half irritated at how effortlessly Lena could navigate her social circles. Sophia's life had never been like that. She wasn't the one everyone gravitated to. She wasn't the one who had people laughing just by entering a room. Lena's group of friends followed her like a flock, their chatter mingling with the sounds of the bustling campus. As they approached, one of the guys, Chris, nudged Lena and pointed toward a young man on his hands and knees, carefully scrubbing the floor. Greg, the janitor. The guy who always seemed to be there but never really noticed by anyone, unless they needed something cleaned. Lena's lips curled into a mischievous smile as she subtly dropped a candy wrapper at Greg's feet. The action was deliberate, performed with such ease and casualness that it almost seemed like she didn't think about it. "Hey Greg," she called sweetly, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "You missed a spot," she added, smirking, as the group giggled. Sophia froze, her stomach turning. The young man looked up slowly, his brow furrowing as he bent down to pick up the discarded wrapper. He didn't say anything, but Sophia could see the silent sting in his eyes as he did so. It wasn't much, a tiny piece of trash on the floor, but it was a public reminder of his place in the world. To them, he was invisible, a servant of sorts. Sophia's heart sank. She'd seen Greg around campus before, always working quietly in the background, never asking for attention, never bothering anyone. She didn't know much about him, but she knew the kind of work he did. She knew how hard it was, how humbling it could be. She had worked long hours during the summers herself, doing odd jobs to help her family. Cleaning, waiting tables, anything to make ends meet. She understood what it was like to toil and scrape by, to give everything you had without expecting recognition. But what Lena did, the casual cruelty of it, burned. She had always known Lena could be a little brash, but this was something different. "Lena, stop it," Sophia said suddenly, her voice sharper than she intended. Her words hung in the air for a moment, before she quickly added, "That's not funny." Lena turned to her, her expression momentarily confused, then dismissive. "What, are you going to lecture me now, Sophia? It's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." Sophia's face flushed with embarrassment. She could feel the heat creeping up her neck as she glanced at Greg, who was still bent down, his face unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met. She could see the weariness in his gaze, the kind of tiredness that only comes from years of taking the brunt of other people's disdain. But there was something else there too, an odd kind of calm, as if he had already learned to accept the way things were. Sophia rushed forward, bending down to pick up the wrapper herself, a small act of defiance. As her fingers brushed against the crumpled paper, she felt a strange mix of shame and resolve. She stood up, holding it out to Greg with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about that," she said quietly. "You don't deserve that." Greg looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening just slightly. He nodded, still not saying anything, before turning to head back to his work. The moment felt awkward, but Sophia couldn't help but notice how kind his eyes were, even after everything. Lena, clearly irritated by the shift in the mood, made a snide comment to her friends, but Sophia wasn't listening anymore. She was too busy watching Greg walk away, the faint sound of his mop swishing across the floor echoing in her mind. Once Lena and her group had moved on, Sophia lingered for a moment longer, staring after the young man. She couldn't shake the image of him, the way he seemed to silently endure the insults, as if they didn't matter. But to her, they did matter. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at her when their eyes met. Was it gratitude? Or just a simple recognition of someone who, for the briefest of moments, saw him for who he really was? Her thoughts were interrupted when Lena called her name, snapping her back into reality. "Come on, Sophie, you're being weird. Let's go get lunch." But Sophia wasn't ready to join her just yet. Her stomach was still twisting with the remnants of what had just happened. As she followed her friend down the hallway, she couldn't help but glance back one last time at Greg. He was still working, still cleaning, still invisible to the world. Sophia couldn't get the image of him out of her mind, and as the day dragged on, she found herself wondering who he really was beneath the uniform. What kind of person was he when no one was watching? The next day, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort from the previous afternoon. It was as if the moment with Greg, him kneeling on the floor, humiliated by Lena's casual cruelty, had carved a permanent spot in her mind. She thought about it all night, tossing and turning in bed, replaying the scene over and over again in her head. Her thoughts felt like a tangled mess of guilt and confusion. Why had Lena done that? Why hadn't she said something sooner? But the real question that kept lingering, the one that Sophia couldn't quite shake, was what made her care so much. Greg was just a janitor. She barely knew him. Yet something about the way he had looked at her, his quiet dignity in the face of Lena's mockery, stuck with her. Why did she feel like she owed him something? By the time the next morning came, Sophia was still wrestling with her thoughts, her mind too scattered to focus on anything for long. She had a presentation to give in her law class, but her mind kept drifting to Greg, to his worn-out uniform, to the sadness in his eyes. She quickly shoved her textbook into her bag and left the dorm, trying to push the thoughts aside. But they stayed with her. As she rushed through the crowded hallways, trying to get to class on time, she saw him again. Greg was standing near a set of lockers, his mop in hand, methodically cleaning the floor. He didn't notice her at first, he never did. He was so focused on his work, moving with an almost rhythmic precision, as if the routine of cleaning had become second nature to him. But today, something was different. He was humming quietly to himself, his lips moving in time to a song Sophia couldn't quite hear. There was a small, almost imperceptible smile on his face. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it was there. Sophia hesitated. She wasn't sure what to do, whether to just pass by and pretend nothing had happened, or to stop and say something. She wasn't even sure what she would say. But then he caught her gaze. His eyes met hers, and there it was again, this silent understanding. There was no awkwardness, no bitterness, just a calmness that seemed to wrap around both of them like a quiet reassurance. Greg didn't speak, but his gaze softened, as if acknowledging that she hadn't been like the others. Sophia swallowed hard, fighting the sudden rush of emotion that surged through her. She took a deep breath and walked toward him, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. She didn't know what she was going to say, but she felt like she had to say something. "Hey," she began, her voice quieter than she intended. Greg raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, simply waiting for her to continue. I wanted to apologize, she said, her throat tightening a little. For yesterday. The way they treated you, I shouldn't have let it happen. Greg looked down at the floor, pausing for a moment. He didn't seem upset or angry, just resigned. It's not your fault, he replied, his voice steady, almost detached. People like to make fun of what they don't understand. It's just easier that way. Sophia's heart clenched at the matter-of-fact tone in his voice. He had accepted the cruelty, not as something to fight, but as part of his reality. I'm sorry anyway, she said, her voice stronger now. You don't deserve that. Greg didn't respond immediately. He just nodded slightly as if acknowledging her words, but still not meeting her eyes. Then, to Sophia's surprise, he reached into the small cart of cleaning supplies at his side and pulled out a small bouquet of white lilies. These are for you, he said, his voice soft but sincere. I wanted to thank you for standing up for me yesterday. You didn't have to, but you did. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she looked down at the delicate flowers in his hands. It wasn't the grand gesture that surprised her, it was the thoughtfulness behind it. She had barely said anything to him, barely even known him, and yet here he was, giving her something kind in return. I don't know what to say, she stammered, her hands shaking slightly as she took the bouquet from him. The lilies smelled sweet and pure, their petals soft to the touch. You don't need to say anything, Greg replied, his tone still gentle. I just wanted to show my appreciation. You were kind when no one else was. Sophia felt a warmth flood through her chest, something she hadn't expected. She had always prided herself on being a decent person, on doing the right thing. But Greg? He was someone who had seen kindness in her when she hadn't expected to receive any in return. She stared at him for a long moment, unsure of what to do next. She had never expected to be standing here with him, alone, exchanging words that felt more genuine than any conversation she had had with most of her friends. There was something about Greg, something that made her feel as though she were seeing the world in a different way. I'd like to take you out for coffee sometime, she blurted out before she could stop herself. Her face flushed immediately. Why had she said that? Was she seriously asking the janitor out for coffee? She hardly knew him. Greg seemed surprised at first, his eyes widening slightly. But then he smiled, a real, genuine smile that made her heart skip a beat. I like that, he said, the warmth in his voice making her feel at ease. Sophia's heart fluttered, and she smiled back, unsure of what was happening between them, but feeling a spark of something real. Something that had been missing in her life for a long time. As she walked away, the lilies still in her hands, she couldn't stop thinking about Greg. She wasn't sure where this would go, or even what it meant. But she knew one thing for sure, he wasn't just a janitor. He was someone who had caught her attention in a way no one else ever had. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was doing something real, something that mattered. Sophia smiled to herself, the thought of a simple cup of coffee suddenly feeling like the most exciting thing in the world. The days that followed felt like a blur to Sophia. She couldn't stop thinking about Greg. Every time she passed him in the hallway, her stomach did a strange little flip. She hadn't expected him to accept her offer of coffee so readily, or for her heart to race every time she saw him. She'd grown accustomed to her life at Boston University, where everything felt predictable and safe. Her friends, her professors, the lectures. It was all a world she knew well, a world that gave her a sense of belonging. But Greg, he was something different, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, and it intrigued her. Sophia kept wondering why she was so drawn to him. He wasn't a rich kid like the guys in her classes. He wasn't wearing designer clothes or driving a fancy car. He didn't have the polished persona that made her friends drool over the latest social media influencers. But there was something about the way he carried himself, the quiet dignity with which he worked, and that smile. The smile he had given her the other day when he handed her the lilies. She couldn't get it out of her mind. Their coffee date was set for that Friday afternoon. It was a crisp, chilly day, and the city of Boston seemed to be buzzing with the energy of students preparing for the weekend. As she walked to Vanilla Moon, the cafe Greg had suggested, Sophia felt both excited and nervous. She had never felt this way before. It was just coffee, right? Just a casual meeting. But the thought of seeing Greg outside the context of the university's cold, impersonal halls made her heart beat faster. Vanilla Moon was located in the South End, a quiet corner of the city with cobblestone streets and rows of boutique shops. The cafe itself was small, cozy, with warm lighting that made the cold outside seem far away. It had a rustic charm, with wooden tables, vintage chairs, and a coffee bar that hummed with the sound of espresso machines. A jazz playlist floated in the background, giving the place a relaxed yet sophisticated atmosphere. Sophia loved it immediately. She arrived a few minutes early and stood outside, taking in the sight of the cafe as she waited for Greg. He had mentioned he would be there at 3, and she wanted to make sure she was on time. Her nerves were getting the best of her. This was so different from any date she'd been on before. There was no grand romantic expectation here, no pretense. It was just two people who had connected in the most unlikely way. When Greg walked in, she saw him immediately. He wasn't wearing his janitor's uniform. Instead, he was dressed in a well-fitted sweater and dark jeans, looking effortlessly casual but with a quiet kind of elegance. His hair was slightly tousled, his expression warm yet a little shy, and the moment he saw her, his face lit up with that same smile that had left her breathless the first time they met. Sophia's heart skipped a beat as he approached her table. She hadn't expected the sight of him to hit her like this. There was something magnetic about him. Greg was just Greg. No flash, no gimmicks. Just him. And somehow it was more than enough. "Hi, Sophia," he said, his voice as soft and kind as it had been before. "It's good to see you." Sophia smiled back, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hi, Greg. You made it." They exchanged pleasantries for a moment as he sat down across from her. The nervous tension was palpable, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just new. They both seemed unsure of where to begin, but that didn't last long. Greg was the first to break the silence, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair a little, "I wasn't expecting to be here with you. I thought this was supposed to be a casual coffee, but here we are." Sophia laughed softly, the sound more relaxed than she'd expected. "Yeah, I didn't really know what I was expecting either." Greg grinned, his eyes sparkling with something playful. "Well, in that case, I guess I should say thank you for agreeing to this. I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." "I was serious when I invited you," she replied, her voice light. "I don't back out of plans." They both paused, exchanging a look that carried more weight than they let on. They were both trying to make sense of this unexpected connection. Sophia especially felt as though she were on unfamiliar ground. She didn't typically go for the quiet guy who worked behind the scenes. She didn't date people like Greg. But something about him felt real in a way that was hard to describe. "So," Greg began, leaning forward a little, his tone more earnest now, "I'm guessing you have some questions. About me, I mean. You probably wonder what a guy like me is doing here with someone like you." Sophia blinked, surprised by his directness. "What do you mean, someone like me?" Greg hesitated for a moment before responding, his voice thoughtful. "Well, let's face it, Sophia. You're different. You come from a different world than I do. You're a student here, you're smart, you have a bright future ahead of you. And I'm just," he stopped himself, then shrugged. "I'm just a guy who cleans the floors." Sophia felt her heart tighten at the way he downplayed himself. "Greg, don't say that," she said quickly, shaking her head. "You're not just a guy who cleans floors. That's not what matters to me." For a moment, Greg didn't say anything, his gaze softening as he looked at her. Then he smiled, a little unsure but grateful. "I didn't expect you to say that." Sophia smiled back. "Well, you don't know me as well as you think. I think you're a lot more than what you do for a living." They both fell into a comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of conversation around them filling the space. The tension between them seemed to dissolve as they sipped their coffee, each lost in their own thoughts, but both sensing the unspoken connection that had already begun to form. "So," Greg said, breaking the silence with a more relaxed tone, "what about you? I've heard you're studying law, which, to be honest, sounds way more intimidating than cleaning floors." Sophia laughed, the sound light and free. "It definitely has its moments," she replied. "But I like it. It makes me feel like I'm doing something important, you know." Greg nodded. "I get that. I really do. You've got a lot of potential, Sophia. You've got a whole life ahead of you." Sophia met his gaze, her heart fluttering slightly at the sincerity in his words. "What about you, Greg? What's your potential? Do you think you'll always be cleaning floors?" Greg paused, a thoughtful look crossing his face. For a moment, it seemed like he was measuring his words carefully. Then he looked at her, his voice steady. "I don't know," he admitted. "I used to think I was stuck in this job forever. But sometimes, life has a way of surprising you. Maybe I'm meant for more than I realized." Sophia looked at him, the quiet strength in his words striking a chord deep inside her. "I think you are," she said softly, her voice carrying an unspoken promise. The conversation continued, flowing easily between lighthearted chatter and deeper, more meaningful topics. They found themselves laughing, debating, and sharing more of themselves than they had with anyone else in a long time. Sophia had never expected to connect with Greg this way. She had thought their coffee would be just a small act of kindness, something to make up for the awkwardness of the previous day. But here they were, two people from very different worlds, discovering something real and genuine. As they said their goodbyes that afternoon, Greg gave her another one of those smiles. "Thanks for today, Sophia. It was nice. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I'm glad we did this." Sophia smiled back, feeling lighter than she had in days. "Me too, Greg. I'm really glad we did." As she walked back to campus, she couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. And for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't scare her. As the weeks passed, the connection between Sophia and Greg grew stronger, though it remained something unexpected and, to be honest, uncharted for both of them. Sophia found herself thinking about him more often than she had anticipated, her mind drifting to their coffee date, the laughter they shared, the comfortable silence that had enveloped them in that cozy cafe. Greg had continued to be his quiet, humble self, always with a gentle smile and a kind word, but something about him had changed in her eyes. He wasn't just the janitor anymore, he was Greg, a person with depth, kindness, and a quiet strength that Sophia couldn't ignore. But of course, things weren't as simple as they felt between the two of them. Sophia was a student at one of the most prestigious universities in the country, surrounded by classmates who were driven, wealthy, and often arrogant. She had worked hard to earn her place among them, pushing herself through late nights and countless exams. She had never let anything get in the way of her goals, her dreams of becoming a successful lawyer. And yet now she found herself torn between two worlds: the life she had worked so hard to build, and the life she was beginning to imagine with Greg. The whispers started small. A comment here or there, a passing remark about how Sophia was spending more and more time with Greg, the janitor. She had heard them before, those jokes about mixing with the wrong crowd, or lowering your standards. But they weren't just jokes, they were criticisms. The kind that made her feel uncomfortable, made her question whether she was doing something foolish by continuing to see Greg. One afternoon, as she was walking through the campus courtyard with Lena and a few other friends, the conversation turned, as it often did, to their latest crushes, relationships, and future plans. The topic quickly turned to Sophia's apparent new interest in Greg. "So how's your janitor doing?" Lena's voice was dripping with sarcasm, and there was a smirk on her face that Sophia had learned to recognize all too well. It was the kind of smirk Lena used when she was making a point, or worse, making fun of someone. Sophia hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Lena, we're just friends, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. It's nothing like you think. Lena raised an eyebrow. Just friends, huh? I mean, I get it. He's probably the only one in the building who's paying attention to you, right? You sure you don't want to keep it that way? The other girls in the group giggled, their eyes darting between Sophia and Lena, waiting for her to respond. The laughter was light, but there was an edge to it, and it made Sophia's skin crawl. Sophia clenched her fists, the familiar feeling of frustration and anger bubbling up inside her. She had always been the kind of person who kept her emotions in check, who preferred to keep the peace and avoid confrontation. But today the words hurt more than they ever had before. You don't get it, Lena, Sophia said, her voice quieter but firm. He's a person, just like anyone else. And maybe you should try treating him with some respect. Lena rolled her eyes, as if the very idea was laughable. Oh, respect. Really, Sophia, you're going to defend him now? Her voice had taken on an almost mocking tone, as if Sophia's defense of Greg was some kind of absurdity. You can't seriously be falling for him, can you? The words stung, and for a moment, Sophia felt a knot form in her stomach. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Lena to be so cruel, so dismissive of someone she barely knew. But she wasn't going to back down, not this time. Maybe I am, Sophia replied, her voice gaining strength as she looked directly at Lena. What's it to you? Lena's face twisted with disbelief, and she shook her head, clearly not expecting the response. But she didn't push any further. Instead, she turned her back on Sophia and joined the others, who quickly followed her lead. The conversation shifted back to something more comfortable for them, something that didn't make them question their own actions. Sophia stood there, her breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps. She had said what she needed to say, but the weight of her words, of standing up for Greg, felt heavier than she expected. She wasn't sure if she had convinced anyone, least of all Lena. But in that moment, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe it was the realization that she wasn't just defending Greg, she was defending herself too. Her choice, her feelings, her right to be with someone who made her feel seen and understood. That evening, after a long day of lectures and assignments, Sophia met Greg outside their usual cafe. He had sent her a text earlier, asking if she was still up for meeting. She'd agreed, eager to see him and talk. She needed to clear her mind, to escape the cold judgment she'd been subjected to all day. When she walked in, Greg was already there, sitting at their usual spot by the window. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, and his eyes were focused on a book, though he looked up as soon as she entered. Hey, he greeted her, his voice warm, as always. Sophia smiled, grateful for the quiet comfort he always provided. Hey, Greg. She slid into the chair across from him, feeling the weight of the conversation with Lena still pressing on her shoulders. Greg must have noticed the change in her mood because he immediately set his book down and gave her his full attention. What's going on? He asked gently, his voice soft but curious. Sophia hesitated for a moment, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her cup. I had a conversation today, she said, unsure of how to frame it. About you. Greg's expression didn't change, but he leaned forward, clearly listening intently. And Sophia sighed, taking a deep breath before continuing. They don't get it. They don't understand why I'm spending time with you. They think it's beneath me or something. Greg's face softened, and he looked at her with such sincerity that it almost made her heart ache. People are going to think what they want to think, he said, his voice steady and calm. You can't change that. But you know what? I don't care what they think. And I don't want you to care either. Sophia felt a rush of gratitude flood through her. She had been worried that Greg would feel hurt by what Lena and the others had said, that he might pull away from her. But he wasn't angry, wasn't upset. He was calm, like always. I don't care either, Sophia said quietly, her voice stronger than before. But it still bothers me, you know. That people like Lena, they can be so judgmental. Greg smiled softly, that quiet, knowing smile that always seemed to put her at ease. I know, but it doesn't change who we are. What matters is what we have. Sophia nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what would come next for them, or how things would turn out. But she knew one thing for certain: she had never felt more certain of anything in her life. Greg wasn't just someone who cleaned floors. He was someone who had a heart as deep as the ocean, and for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Not for her status, not for what she was supposed to be, but for who she was. And for that, she would never apologize. They spent the rest of the evening talking about everything and nothing. They didn't have to prove anything to each other. They were simply two people who had found something real in each other, a kind of connection that couldn't be defined by labels or expectations. For the first time in a long time, Sophia felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Months passed, and the relationship between Sophia and Greg evolved in a way that neither of them could have predicted. What had started as a simple coffee date between two people from vastly different worlds had blossomed into something deeper, more genuine than anything either of them had ever experienced. They saw each other nearly every day, sharing quiet moments, long walks through the streets of Boston, and conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. Their bond, grounded in honesty, respect, and mutual understanding, became something they both cherished. Sophia had never been the type to ignore the expectations that others placed on her. She had always worked hard to earn her place in the world, especially at Boston University, where students came from families with wealth and influence. But now, with Greg, she felt a sense of freedom that she had never known before. She was no longer concerned with what people thought. She had grown tired of the judgment, the criticism, the whispers behind her back. In Greg, she had found someone who saw her for who she truly was, not for her academic achievements or her family background. But the world outside their bubble was relentless. The whispers didn't stop, they only grew louder. Lena, once a close friend, had become a shadow that hung over Sophia's every step. Every time Sophia saw her in the hallway, every time Lena's eyes flickered to Greg, there was a silent judgment that Sophia could feel cutting through her like a knife. She had tried to let go of it, to ignore Lena's comments, but the sting was still there. Her classmates, too, began to make snide remarks, the kind that dug into her skin and left a mark she couldn't easily shake off. "Is it true you're dating him?" one of her classmates asked casually one day, as though it was nothing more than idle gossip. "I mean, you're not seriously going to marry a janitor, right?" Sophia felt her blood boil at the question, but she didn't let it show. She had learned, over the past months, to hold her ground. "Yes, I am," she replied firmly, her voice cool and steady. "And I don't owe you or anyone else an explanation." The conversation ended there, the girl's smirk falling away as she walked off, no doubt to tell others about her conversation with Sophia. But for the first time, it didn't bother her. She felt a quiet strength building inside her, the kind of strength that came from knowing that she wasn't just protecting Greg, but protecting herself too. She wasn't about to let anyone, especially Lena, make her feel small for the choices she had made. One evening, after a particularly difficult day filled with whispers and sideways glances, Sophia met Greg at their usual spot, Vanilla Moon. They had grown accustomed to their quiet moments there, away from the noise and the judgment of the outside world. Tonight, though, Sophia felt a heavy weight on her chest. She wasn't sure if it was the pressure of her studies or the growing tension with her classmates, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had to give. Greg was already there when she walked in, sitting at the same table by the window, his eyes flicking up to meet hers as she entered. He smiled, but there was something different in his gaze, something that made her pause. "Hey," she greeted him softly, sitting down across from him. "Hey," Greg replied, his voice calm, but Sophia could tell that he, too, felt the weight of the unspoken tension. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of conversation around them serving as a backdrop to the quiet understanding between them. Sophia felt her heart beating faster, a feeling she couldn't quite place, but that had been growing inside her for days. I've been thinking, she began, her voice steady but uncertain. About us. About everything. Greg raised an eyebrow, clearly listening. What about us? Sophia took a deep breath, her hands wrapping around her cup of coffee, as she struggled to find the right words. I know what people are saying. I can feel the way they look at me. And it's not just them, it's me too, sometimes. I wonder if I'm making a mistake. If this is really what I want, or if I'm just trying to prove something. Greg didn't interrupt. He simply waited, his gaze steady, his expression open and patient. I'm proud of who I am. I worked hard to get here, to be at this school, to have the life I have. And sometimes I feel like I'm giving up everything I've worked for. Like they're right, like I should be with someone who fits in better, someone who makes sense. Greg's face softened, and he leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but firm. Sophia, you're not giving anything up. Not really, you're not giving up who you are. You're just choosing to see something beyond the expectations of others. And maybe it's not about fitting in. Maybe it's about finding someone who sees you for who you really are, not who they think you should be. Sophia's eyes filled with emotion at his words. She had spent so long fighting to be seen by others, to prove that she belonged. But now with Greg, she realized that being seen for the right reasons, being seen for her, was what truly mattered. I've never been with someone like you before, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep going against everything everyone says. Greg reached across the table, his hand covering hers, warm and reassuring. You are. You've been strong your whole life, Sophia. You've gotten this far on your own. And you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Sophia felt the weight in her chest lift slightly. She squeezed his hand, grateful for the comfort he offered, for the security in knowing that he wasn't asking her to be someone she wasn't. They didn't need anyone's approval. All they needed was each other. I love you, she said quietly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. She had never said them before, never quite felt this certain about anything in her life. Greg's expression softened, his eyes lighting up with something akin to relief. I love you too, Sophia. I've never felt more sure of anything. In that moment, everything else faded away. The pressure, the judgment, the doubts, they all seemed distant, unimportant. What mattered was the quiet connection between them, the love they had found in each other despite the odds, despite the world that told them their relationship didn't make sense. The following weeks felt like a new beginning. Sophia stopped worrying about the whispers. She stopped trying to explain herself to people who couldn't understand. Instead, she focused on what really mattered, her love for Greg and the future they were building together. When graduation day arrived, Sophia stood at the front of the auditorium, waiting for her turn to walk across the stage. She could feel the familiar tension in the air, but this time, it didn't bother her. She had earned her degree through her own hard work. She had made it. And as she stepped onto the stage, her eyes scanned the crowd, looking for Greg. When she finally spotted him, standing near the back, a proud smile on his face, her heart swelled with warmth. The world might have thought they were an unlikely pair, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. Sophia had found something far more valuable than the approval of others. She had found love, respect, and a sense of self that no one could take away. And that, she realized, was all she had ever needed. After the ceremony, Greg met her outside, just as he always did. They stood there, side by side, looking out at the future ahead of them. Together.